Coming off of the resounding success of Resident Evil 2 Remake, it seemed painfully obvious that we were not done getting remakes of the old Resident Evil games, bringing them up to a modern 2020 standard of gaming. So when Capcom announced that Resident Evil 3 Remake was going to be a thing, it came as little shock. But given how faithful the first two remakes were, it seemed like there was no reason to be concerned, right? I mean, this is a fan favorite for a ton of people, including my friend Cameron, as well as a lot of you that left comments on the video of the original where I called it boring. However, what we got was so much of a deviation from the original game that not only was it not faithful, it was also a pretty lackluster game even in its own regard. From boring level design, subpar boss fights, and a focus on scripted chase sequences, this game really is a letdown, and in this video I want to get into the details as to why. If you enjoy this type of retrospective and review content, consider subscribing to the channel, and while you're at it, take a look at the back catalog of videos we have out there so far, including every Resident Evil game up until 3 Remake. With having done all those, as well as Wolfenstein and Dead Rising, there's definitely a lot to chew on with a lot more to come. I hope that you enjoy this video, and without any more delay, let's look back at Resident Evil 3 Nemesis Remake. Resident Evil 3 was never my favorite Resident Evil game back in the day. I liked it, it was fun, but in terms of how it stacks up compared to the other two in the original run, this was aptly third on my list of the fixed camera Resident Evil games, having enjoyed the original and 2 far more, especially 2. But coming off of the heels of Resident Evil 2 Remake and how much I loved what Capcom did with that classic, I had no reason to expect anything less than awesome upon the release of Nemesis Remake. What caught me, however, was the distinct lack of memory of even playing this game, despite me having streamed it on Twitch at the time when it was first released. And coming back to it again for the purposes of this video, it is clear why I have no recollection of any of this, why my memory seemingly completely blocked out ever playing this game. Upon completion of it again for the purposes of this video, I figured out why. This game is bad. Bad as a game, and as a fan of Resident Evil, absolute garbage. With the amount of changes made from the original, the squandered waste potential that was Nemesis, the changes made to Jill, and the dumbing down of the level design in this game is boring as a standalone title and an abomination as a remake. Holding virtually no similarities to the original game, it amazes me that Capcom would even attempt to pass this off as Resident Evil 3 Remake. It should be more like loosely inspired version of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, but not really. I mean, hell, they even took Nemesis out of the title of this game. But Brendan, you might say. These are some harsh statements, so where is this coming from? Well, that being said, let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. First off, let's start with something positive. Resident Evil 3 Remake is visually impressive on almost every level. I maybe stand alone in saying that I don't mind Jill's redesign as much as a lot of people here on YouTube. While a little in the vein of tough girl in tank top and jeans, like the redesign of Lara Croft from the Tomb Raider reboot, she's still a pretty good looking character. Cute, but given how she was a special forces cop, could most definitely fuck you up. Nemesis, in the first form, looks pretty awesome. Standing heads over you, wrapped like a leather daddy, is an imposing presence, much like Mr. X was in Resident Evil 2 Remake. In actuality, well, we'll get there. Carlos had a massive redesign, and while it looks good, I'm personally not a fan of it myself, especially when it comes to the hair. The giant poofball hairdo, much like Ichiban from Yakuza Like a Dragon, is off-putting and dopey. While this style of hair works for Ichiban, given how his character is kind of dopey, Carlos needed to see another visit to the barber to give him a cut that was well within regulation, like the other guys in his unit have as well. It's just impractical in all use cases, as it gives zombies another handhold to grab, and if you were in combat with other humans, that hair screams where you're at if you're ever trying to tuck into cover. This is nitpicky, I know, but coming off of the remake and how much attention to detail was placed in almost everything, this stands out to me given my background being prior military and being part of a military family forever. The pre-order bonuses does give the player that original look, but these are additive costumes and it's hard for me to even count those. I have to say that the world itself is beautiful to look at as well, using far more colors than even Resident Evil 2 Remake did to make certain locations stand out and pop a little bit more. Like the cinema that explodes during your run to the train station, or the donut shop being lit up like a central beacon for the downtown area. Gunplay also feels good and snappy and pretty crisp. And the trade-offs for moving and standing still, like it was in Resident Evil 2 Remake, still apply. The shotgun got a massive tune-up as well, basically guaranteeing a one-shot head explosion, unlike Resident Evil 2 Remake, which while maybe a little bit overtuned and broken, never bothered me with just how good it felt to pop heads, like that news reporter popping grapes before falling out of that tub.
These buckets are filled with grapes. What kind of grapes? Foods, having wine tours and tastings, vineyard tours, seminars, arts and crafts. It's a lot of fun. Oh, 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 oh,
The dodge from the original was incorporated as well, and here in the remake it actually feels really good. With just the simple click of a button, you're able to either dodge away from the zombies or dodge into them, knocking them back or hopefully popping ahead. However, and I may have missed it, so let me know, but I don't think the dodge was ever called out in any sort of in-game tutorial at all. Seeing as I kind of stumbled upon it by accident while doing a Carlos section and was surprised when I did it into a zombie and his head basically exploded. I may be wrong about this, but feel free to let me know in the comments below if I'm right or wrong on this. Overall, the actuality of playing Resident Evil 3 Remake still feels really good, snappy, and fluid. And while this game may look good and play okay, it's all of the underlying issues that really kill this game for me. And with the good must come the bad. So let's go ahead and dive into the bad. In looking back at the last couple of videos as we've been talking about the remakes of the older games, we've discussed the major question on every fan's mind, that being, what changed when remaking this game? For the first two remakes, while some minor tweaks were made from the original games in the transition to the 21st century, the core of what made these games tick remained intact, from the narrative, pacing, and mechanics of said game. So, when Resident Evil 3 Remake was announced, the same questions naturally floated out there, albeit a little less given how well the last two were received by players new and old. I mean, two in a row were pretty true to form, so maybe Capcom actually gets it right and knows what they're doing? Wrong. Just wrong. While playing through Resident Evil 3 Remake, I was baffled to find that the only real thing that stayed the same from the original game were the characters, Nemesis, and the general setting of Raccoon City. The amount of story beats, location changes, and even boss fights that changed were staggering, which is far more apparent given the closest proximity I had when playing this from the original. And it all starts at the beginning. We open the remake playing through Jill's eyes in first person, who is having a dream, or really a nightmare, of becoming a zombie herself. Waking up, we explore the apartment, answer the phone, and bam! In comes Nemesis. I bring all this up as a squandered opportunity here to get to know Jill a little bit better. The game assumes prior knowledge of who Jill is, a member of the STARS unit who survived the Spencer Mansion incident from Resident Evil 1, having battled countless zombies, tyrants, lickers, hunters, and more. We get none of that here, just a strange dream, some random notes, and a phone call from Brad who tells us to leave now before rudely being interrupted by the game's main antagonist, Nemesis. And for a character who was the shining point in the original game, the lack of build-up and tension given to Nemesis himself here in the remake is absolutely tragic. Think back to the original title for a moment. Jill runs up to the RCPD when, from behind, Brad runs in, covered in blood, telling Jill to run as Nemesis comes out of nowhere, dropping from the sky, stabbing Brad through his face with his fist tentacle, only for him to turn his sights on you, where your only two options are to either run or fight. This was after the entire introduction of the game, where you're roaming the zombie-infested back alleys, meeting that guy who hides in the freezer truck, the first real human you actually see, and fight your way to even get to the police station in the first place. There's a build up to the presence here for Nemesis, who serves as the added ever-roaming threat to us the entire runtime of the game. In the remake, he just bursts through the wall no less than 2 minutes after we've started the game, leading the player to hold up on the controller for no less than maybe 10 minutes, while a ton of scripted chase sequences where Jill thwarts him with bookcases and doors because this monster didn't just burst through a wall 5 minutes prior. In fact, this game does everything it can to completely neuter Nemesis as a whole, with 80% of the time that he's even on screen, he's relegated to just more chase sequences or boss fights. Short of one section 2, he's completely stripped of the iconic rocket launcher we all known him for, that weapon only making an appearance after Jill gets the train line working again. In the original Nemesis, he could appear anywhere: City Hall, the gas station, random side alleys. In the remake, there is only one time where he's roaming the streets, that being after you hose the back alley fire, and only around the donut shop, or the central area. Besides that, it's just just the lame ass chase scenes or boss fights all throughout this game. He's far less threatening here than he was in the original, and the neutering of this once terrifying monster is honestly just sad to me. Also gone is the choice making we had in the original as well, centered around dealing with intense situations like lots of zombies or whether to shock or blind Nemesis at the clock tower. While not a huge part of the original, it did add some variation between run-throughs of the original game, and why these were taken out entirely here in the remake I will never understand. It's just another couple scenes of rendering and a choice selection button. I mean, hell, we've been doing that in video games since PlayStation 1. Nemesis truly deserved better than the lame treatment he received here in this remake, and it's a shame to see him relegated to basically a lesser version of Mr. X from the last remake. Where Nemesis was the final evolution of the tyrant for the originals in both looks and mechanic, here in the remake he's just a lamer leather daddy with no fedora. As we have discussed in prior videos, location in Resident Evil games is everything, and for survival horror in general as well. And while it was a bit harsher with the original Resident Evil 3 location than the first two games, what has been done here in the remake is also just kind of baffling and confusing. Back in the original video, I discussed how I thought the scope of Raccoon City was a bit far-reaching compared to the first two games that were both relegated to indoor locations, giving these areas a ton more character and build up as we revisit rooms and location time and time again. At the time, I thought the scope of a bunch of city streets and their locations like the gas station, diners, city hall, power plant, and even the interlocking streets and alleys were a bit too large in scope for my tastes. Man, am I eating my words now. Here in the remake, the first area that takes place in the city streets have been gimped beyond belief, because I guess Raccoon City essentially only consists of two streets, a couple of alleyways, a donut shop, a toy store, a power plant, and a box warehouse. No lie, once you put the fire out, you could run from one street to the next in probably less than 30 seconds, and that's the entirety of the first part of the game. Shrinking this space down not only makes it less interesting to navigate through, but it also dampens the amount of exploration, resource gathering, and locked doors and puzzles, the staple for these games, which this game just lacks in spades. While the area of the donut shop and toy store looks cool with the lighting and the amount of detail, there is not much to it, as all we do is flip 3 breakers on a power plant and solve a train map puzzle, a puzzle where the game literally gives you the answer to it on the screen above you. Heading down to the sewer, you have basically one path to go down to get a battery, only to double back and escape from the door right there at the beginning. Even the hospital section as Carlos does not leave a ton to explore, as following the halls leads you to a tape recorder that you need to unlock the door to get the cure for Jill, and then you just go back 2 rooms and open the locked door. From a game that built its bones on backtracking, exploration, puzzle solving, and all the standard Resident Evil fare, this remake turns Raccoon City into what could essentially be an interactive roller coaster, going on one direction, getting chased, go in the other direction, get chased, rinse, and repeat. All of the standard trappings of what made these games so popular back in the PlayStation 1 and even in the newly done remakes of Resident Evil 2 is just gone. The things fans of the series love, leaving us with a soulless husk of a remake in name only, as nothing in this game is close to how it was in the original. Hell, we even lost the entire clock tower sequence, which was maybe the most iconic section of this entire game, the focal point that the player is literally constantly heading to in the original game in order to escape. Remember that cutscene in the original of the helicopter coming in to rescue Jill, only to be shot down by Nemesis to strand Jill in the city? Gone. All gone. Instead, we have a rooftop boss fight with a flamethrower Nemesis, followed by another Nemesis boss fight, or I guess he turns into a strange dog and wall runs or something. There's an argument that can be made, I guess, that this game was streamlined. However, in streamlining and cutting these areas down, sapped almost all the fun that I ever have in Resident Evil just straight out of it. The puzzles, item finding, maneuvering through hordes of zombies, and of course, avoiding Nemesis. The cuts made here lost the soul of what people loved about these games, and this one specifically. And to me, that's almost unforgivable as what they did to my boy Nemesis. After everything we've been through, that doesn't even touch on the changes made to the story and the pacing of this game itself. Now, Resident Evil has never been anything on par story-wise with games like Red Dead Redemption 2 or Metal Gear Solid, both massively good in my eyes. But there was a pacing and a flow to these games, allowing for the build-up to the finale, which would normally involve fighting a giant tyrant in an underground lab or something of this nature to shoot him with a rocket launcher. Let's once again take a moment to look at the original opening of the PlayStation 1 version of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Nemesis. Looking back at the beginning of that game, we escape the apartments to head to the warehouse, head down the alleys to meet Brad at the bar, go to RCPD, run into Nemesis, try to call for evacuation, have to escape the police station, and then we make our way down to the train station to meet up with the Umbrella operatives and thus Carlos. Taking roughly an hour for a normal player, there was a lot of buildup that eventually culminated in working with the group that was essentially responsible for everything going on here, giving stakes to Jill making her escape in search of a way out. In the remake, after the chase scene with Nemesis, we run into the bar, Brad gets bit, we are saved by Carlos and taken to the train station all in about the span of 20 minutes. Jill never even goes to RCPD, a seminal point in the original game, that being going back to her old offices to find a way out, reliving the past and remembering her old comrades. After getting the train to work, we are chased by Nemesis again, and Jill runs off and leading to the sewer sequence as mentioned before. Looping around, we get on the train and then we play as Carlos, who then goes to the police station where the area is distilled down to just blasting some zombies and end by going to save Jill from the train crash and subsequent infection. RCPD is subjected to just another place to crawl through, a revisit to the same place that we were in the last game, this time with no real symbology behind it. Yes, it was nice to see Marvin and how he got bit, leading up to the way that we meet him as Leon in Resident Evil 2, and I appreciate that the codes for all the locked doors were essentially the same as the 2 remake as well. However, moving forward in the hospital, this was the section I never really had much of an issue with. That was until we had to hold off a massive horde of zombies while your buddy lowers the barriers. I mean, seriously, this was like 5 to 10 minutes of standing in one room and shooting anything that moved. I can't for the life of me understand why this was added other than to pad out runtime and give a bit of a harder sequence in this game, in a remake of a game that was probably also the shortest in runtime. We also, just by the way, lose the entire garden area in the underground section underneath the fountain there as well. And did I mention the clock tower already? Oh yeah, I did. I'm just still fucking mad about that. All of these set pieces, chase scenes, and condensing of story beats honestly hurt not only the storytelling, but also the pacing of Resident Evil 3 Remake. We've discussed pacing a lot on this channel, as this is an aspect of any media that drive to set the tone and feel of the game or movie. And in this game in particular, from the moment Nemesis bursts through the wall at the very beginning, the game never lets off the gas, and subsequently never giving the player to rest, recalibrate, and reassess, which in turn makes everything not only feel rushed, but short, and also weakens the effect Nemesis has on the game and the player as well. Think back to Mr. X for a moment. He was always around, albeit off screen, allowing the player to come to a state of rest, only for him to appear when you least expect it yet again, ready to bring that left hook to an unsuspecting player. There was a tension bred there. From the moment of his arrival, there was an ebb and flow that he would bring. Chase sequences, escape, continue on your way to solving puzzles, only for him to just duck through the doorway behind you again when you least expect it, ready to fucking knock your teeth in. For a game that is loved by many, this remake seemed to do everything it could to just ruin it, leaving a bad taste for this game in my mouth, and what I feel a lot of yours as well. But I want to hear from you guys. What did you guys think of the Resident Evil 3 remake? I would love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments down below, as I'm pretty consistently engaging in there with you guys as well. So if you agree with any take in this video, be sure to hit that like button. Consider once again subscribing to the channel, and while you're at it, check out the back catalog of videos. We only have one more Resident Evil video left in this series thus far, that being the most recently released remake of Resident Evil 4. But that'll be for a later date, and until then, my name is Brendan, and always remember, laugh and grow fat. Thanks.